With that, over to you, Ralph.
Hey, Ralph, let me introduce you, right? Because
Yes. Let
so
me
Ralph,
introduce to you.
yeah, Ralph is very special.
Oh no.
There are not a whole lot of MVPs in the Microsoft world. Ralph is one of them. He's very much one of the leaders in this space. So you're talking to somebody who is pretty much has all of the knowledge that anybody in Microsoft is going to have about this topic. So take it away, Ralph.
No, no pressure. No pressures at all. Thank you so much for that. All right. Let's see. So I'm using the good old presentation mode of PowerPoint at this point, which means folks can actually go forward, go back on the presentation. If anyone's having trouble using that or not able to see the presentation, do let us know. Raise your hand, and we can change it over to desktop share, which is the way to get around any of those issues. By the way, that's a tip for meetings presentation. Free tips. Yes, this is all about free tips today. All right, so we're talking about Azure supporting the low-code revolution over here. Yes, Azure is one of my favorite topics. Before I became a low-code person, actually I was a high-code person. We'll talk about that in a little bit. All right, let's see. The only, of course, thing about this is it's going to be slow. And if it's too slow, I am going to... Does everyone see page 2 over here, the agenda? I think I'm going to change
I see
to
a
share
white
desktop.
screen.
I see a white screen too, so I'm going to change my share to window desktop. Stand by. Let me know when you start seeing your desktop.
Yep.
I can see your desktop.
Yes. Okay. So then, and of course, my way around this. Here we go. Stand by. And I will turn off the subtitles. If you'd like captions, turn on the captions feature in there, and that way we'll be able to use those space. All right, there we go. Take 2 with different tech. And that the white screen was supposed to do that fun stuff. All right, so our agenda today, some introductions to say who I am, what we're here, and everything else. We'll look at concepts and understanding. As they say, going through a presentation like this, it's a good idea to get a fix on what we know, what we don't, and at least understand and be on the same page with that. We look at 2 of the main areas besides behind really a lot of this low-code revolution piece, which is not so much Azure. Actually, it's very much Azure, but mostly about M365, that SaaS system. We'll talk about that more. We're going to look at in the M365 world and supporting Azure, in the low-code world that's being supported by Azure. We're going to look specifically at Power Platform and D365. As we go through, you'll understand that low-code for other platforms could exist in Azure, but because Azure is our target, we're going to go with what's Microsoft at this point. We're going to look at extending the power of Azure, essentially why Azure is not going to go away, or at least using Azure in a particular way we're doing it. The low-code folks are not taking over. If you're doing any of the heavy engineering for Azure, if you're doing any of the heavy development on the cloud enterprise type stuff, you're going to be sticking around for quite a while, and we're going to go through that. And then we'll give you some next steps, how to follow through, to learn more about it, I don't know, we're not necessarily going to find a career, to add to your utility belt at the very least. And then some time for Q&A. All righty. Got the bridges coming up here. We'll have some introductions over here. And about myself, let's start with me. Where did Ralph come from out of the blue? Yeah, I'm a national solutions architect for sogeti, not the Capgemini side, but actually in the sogeti side. Became an MVP after I got here to sogeti. So here's the thing: 19 years with my other company doing all that stuff, and suddenly I'm in sogeti and become an MVP. Is that a coincidence? Somebody's fingers on the scale, perhaps? I cannot say, but coincidence, something to think about. We were talking about recruiting with sogeti earlier. Here's the thing: in a lot of these companies that are very large, and this is sometimes the concern for a lot of folks. Wow, you guys are so huge. How am I going to fit in there? How is it going to work and everything else? Here's the thing: it's actually up to you guys. I came in here. I could have been the small fish in the big sea. I decided to be big fish in big sea. And that's what I tell folks. You can. That's the power of being sogeti and Capgemini, is you can actually decide, and that's what you want to do. You want to be the big fish in the big sea? You can do it. If you want to just relax and just be incognito fish around the pond, fine. If that's the way you'd like to do it, that's okay. But that's the wonderful thing about working over here, that sense of entrepreneurship. And I sort of made it happen, and here we are. I get to actually speak at user groups. Hey, how about that? I still get to speak at user groups. That's even better. All right, so really quickly, I'm a business applications MVP, which basically means I'm recognized by Microsoft for contributing to the community, for getting the Power Platform and D365 word out there. So that's how they look at me in that particular case, and I've been doing it for a while, and you'll see why. There's something called Sogeti Labs, and I'm a fellow from Sogeti Labs. So yeah, jolly good for the most part. And you can go to labs.sogeti.com. In Sogeti, they have this concept where like they're looking at high tech. If you think about Skunk Works and some sort of companies, we actually have such a thing like that. If you're at that level and you want to play with the big boys, as they say, or the big girls, if you want to do the new tech, you can, as they say, have a place to actually show what you can do. And that's what that system is. And so that's what I'm part of right now. They recognize because I'm using a lot of the, let's say, bleeding edge of this technology. At Twitter, I'm BigPix2000, and remind you that's Twitter. So, it's very, very mixed over there. However, though, I am also one of the user group leaders for the Chicago Microsoft Power Platform user group. That's CMPPUG over there. So I do user group stuff like we're doing over here. And I'm also one of the co-organizers of the M365Chicago.com M365 events. So we're like a virtual event. It was based on what the M365 virtual marathon was, which is some of the famous Microsoft type speakers who said, hey, during COVID, what can we do? We're going to have a virtual event. We're going to use Teams to do it, and we're going to use a dev tenant to do it. We'll talk about dev tenants a little bit later. And they made it happen. We recreated that and made it work. So this is actually turned out it was quite successful. And I also do a podcast, cloudtalkshow.com. So here's the thing. Before I got into all this low-code business, I was like everyone else here doing the Azure stuff, and actually Azure heavy. And when it first came out, it was like, well, the cloud stuff, I think I'm liking this. Oh, 1 minute. And I really got so much into it. I came in from the development side, and I saw the opportunity to really do more with my architecture, let's just say, career when I went to Azure. And so the Cloud Talk Show was a result of that. And if you go to that site right now, you can just go back to some of the first and early shows, you'll get some concepts that apparently still apply today. There's a lot of I told you so sort of things that we can actually say through that one. And we're doing it pretty much weekly, except for when work comes upon us. And we talk about topics like this and other ones that might interest you. I'm on LinkedIn over here. Feel free to LinkedIn to me. I'm up and open to, make more connections. All right. My focus right now is on M365 as a power user, developer, and, of course, as a Power Platform. They call us the Power Addicts. So that's the hashtag Power Addict. If you look for us out there, you will find a lot of folks that are into the Microsoft side of low-code. Semi-mild-mannered architect by day, as Matt has seen, and by night, and probably you've noticed this, especially since night is upon us, entertainer, travel agent, tour guide, teacher, mentor, and that's, by the way, a picture of me in mentor mode. That's stakeholder 6 right now, and hopefully will not interrupt with stakeholder business today. All right, proceeding on, let's actually talk about the topics here. Let's go through some topics and understanding. 1 moment. All right, so first we want to get a bit of definitions. Let's understand what we mean when we say low code. All right, so interestingly enough, I will bring a non-Microsoft definition of it, and from another company called Mendix.com. By the way, we also work with these folks. Low code being the visual approach to software development, optimizing all the development process. I actually like this. I'll let you guys read it for a bit. I'm not going to read it back to you, but the idea over here is the visual piece is the key. You're looking at, I'm going to take this part, I'm going to drag it over here, I'm going to connect it to that part, I'm going to type in a little piece of information over there, and poof, I have code. As opposed to opening up a pad-like system, a Visual Studio Code, Notepad, whatever have you, typing in instructions by text in text form and making that happen, or going into certain areas and writing a whole bunch of maybe arcane special commands to make something happen. That's the difference over here between low code and say other kinds of code. I'll give one more definition that's not quite over here. And the idea that, technically speaking, low code is sort of like a starting point. So imagine we've had frameworks, right? Everyone's has heard of frameworks like, even JavaScript or like TypeScript as a framework, for example, that sits on top of JavaScript. If you think about it, TypeScript maybe low codes a little bit JavaScript because it moves up a level and makes you type a little bit less. However, maybe you type more because, well, now that you can do more, you're actually doing more stuff. But let's just take it even further, going into like systems like React, or going into other kinds of like frameworks where you type in minimal things, or think about the CLI, your command line interface, where you have a piece of command or script. You're going to type in your command and a couple of parameters, and essentially under the covers, tons of code, but that is low code because you only needed to type one little thing to happen. All right, so that's almost low code. You start at that good point, right, and you move forward. So just as a note, when you're trying to compare folks that say, hey, I did it in high code, I can do it in 2 weeks. You did it in low code, and you took a month to figure it out. Well, okay, the starting point might have felt like the low code had the advantage, but it's like the rabbit and the turtle. It started at a high point, but they didn't have requirements. They didn't have all the information. They had pieces they had to build and everything else. Meanwhile, at the high code area, they had their frameworks all ready to go. The CI/CD was ready. Hit the button. I'm good. Of course, they're going to be faster. Right. The idea, though, is when all things are the same, because low code has all those advantages, too. If you put them at the same point, low code is ahead of the game. All right. And now why would you say, well, but the low code doesn't give me all the flexibility? Well, again, find out where that starting point is. We'll actually go through that a little bit and talk about how that works for developers. Let's go now and talk about a little bit on the definitions here about what is the Power Platform, because that is what we're going to talk about as far as the Microsoft point of view of low code. All right, so this is Microsoft's low code platform. And I say no code because no code means you literally will fill in forms like a form, answer a question. Hey, what's your name? What do you weigh? What color do you like? I'm going to create code from this. That is essentially a no code entering. All right, so that's what this is, and it's powered by Dynamics, which is the giant SAAS, a business application system underneath. And of course, at the end of the day, that's what this topic is going to be about, is Azure. It's composed of Power Apps, Power Automate, BI, Power Pages, virtual agents. We'll actually go through all these a little bit later. Let's jump ahead. Here's a key concept. M365, Microsoft 365, the flagship software as a service product for organization productivity. Built on Azure and powered by, my spell checker called it by the same Azure services it markets directly to its customers. So here's the concept over here is we're now taking it a step above. So Azure is powering all this stuff. If we understand that Azure is powering Microsoft 365, the way tenants work, the way all those services work, we're going to understand that on top of that will be the Power Platform or the low-code pieces. Low code could be using the actual M365 piece to do something in a customized way with minimal amount of configuration, but maybe some codey type things like maybe like a little formula that says what today's date plus a week is going to look like. That's an example of where that comes from. So it's very important that we understand that M365 is an important piece to the low code strategy. All right, so we want to put, of course, M365 SaaS in perspective. And the idea over here is we want to look at things like licensing costs. We just talk really quickly about licensing costs. It's about packages. The idea in low code to make a lot of this stuff work. It's like you can do things in Azure and you can do things and you have your Azure price calculator. You have all your ways of getting through everything over as well. But to make low code work in its particular area, you have to make it easy to consume. And of course, the easiest way to consume and deliver something is to put it in the package. All right. So that is the first concept, is that the low code pieces that you see as far as licensing will be a case of pricing a package. And of course, you could another kind of concept in low code as far as costs and licensing is the concept of prepaid capacity. So here's your Azure. I can have like this much storage, and then I pay for this much storage, and we could set up Azure to say grow as you need. All right, nope, that's your limit. You're going to be cut off over there. I control my costs, right? But Azure allows you the flexibility to scale out, scale in, do whatever you wish. The concept in these low-code systems, and this is not just for Microsoft, is you're essentially prepaying for this capacity. In order for them to provide the best service for the item that you're going to give. Essentially, they're going to say, this is the capacity, this is the package, it's going to be exactly this size. So you're going to prepay for this, whether you use it or not. All right, so it's reserved for you, but the whole point is it's reserved for you so that you're not going to have an interruption. You're not going to go in there and find that someone else has been using your stuff like you have in other ways. So this is a very important concept to understand. Another important concept is the fact that you can just add things on. Well, yeah, we have this in Azure too, but they're going to now sell these packages in smaller packages. So big package, smaller packages, the way things cost, and when you're adding to cost, there will be the add-ons, and how those get added on is something to think about, especially if you're architecting. All right, then we have the concept of pay-as-you-go, which is the Azure way. That is there in the low-code area. They've actually made a way to they've figured out how to do pay-as-you-go for a lot of these pieces, but there are catches. The catch is it's going to be pay-as-you-go. However, we're planning that you're going to go to this particular point. All right, and even though it's pay-as-you-go, you're only going to pay for what you use. For example, they've sort of got you to that minimum level. Pay as you go, but you got to give us this, like an ante in a poker game, or just consider it like the 2-drink minimum to be able to get in. You can use whatever you want. You're only going to pay what you want, but hey, you first got to pay for those 2 drinks. All right, and of course, the good old pay for access views and the subscriptions model. This is pretty much the way of things for just about all kinds of like websites and services and everything else. So a lot of that occur in the application space, you're going to find also down at this particular level. Moving on, let's go ahead and we'll talk about M365 in Azure. Let's get a little more Azure-y on the area. Let's look at that at the tie-in, because this is the part that's becomes most interesting. All right, so to tie into M365, all right, one of the biggest ones is the most obvious. The identity management is Active Directory, and although other identity management items can be done to make this work, this is pretty much the source. If you want to understand how to do work with M365 or with the low-code systems that are out there, this is where you would have to have your key expertise to go. For that matter, using this, when this works, everything else above it works just fine. So this is a very important concept. Compute services. Well, I think maybe this goes without saying that the compute services behind the scenes are going to be running a lot of those applications, all that heavy lifting that Microsoft's doing. Just a quick side note, Microsoft has like over 300 million users on M365 right now. I think that number is actually bigger. And then, of course, when folks complain about the performance of their like 200 or 300 user tenant site, and they're like, well, what's going on? Why is it so slow? It's like, well, consider that Microsoft's doing this at such a huge scale. Let's look at what you're doing and maybe vis-a-vis what Microsoft's actually being able to manage. Because if Microsoft's not able to make this work, this would not be successful. We would not even be talking right now. So this is a big part of it. Essentially, making a lot of these low-code services work means that you have to have compute services that are set up to make people not ever worry that there's something going on behind the scenes. Same thing with storage services. Storage services on the big part, what's Microsoft using in the back end? And it looks like SQL. Maybe it's SQL. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's Cosmos or something else that's in the background. Actually, as they say, Dinafash, you did not concern yourself about what's happening in the back. That's at least the view to us from the user side coming to use the system, or the low-code folks that are trying to use it. Just suffice to say that behind-the-scenes storage services are taking care of all the heavy plumbing and lifting and everything else. And all we have to do now is do our configuration, and behind the scenes it's taken care of. Understanding how the services work underneath allows us to extend, but we'll go into that later. All right, other things that are out there. The AI and bot services. This is on Azure. When those came out, I was playing left and right. Those were fun. They were high codey. Well, there was a lot of work to get those set up, to get those stood up. You couldn't exactly sit there in a couple of minutes and get them going, or in an hour sometimes, or sometimes even a day. It took a while to get those happening. But those right now have, let's just say, from when this first came out, This is baby Skynet is basically living underneath the covers over here. This is actually running a lot of what's happening in the M365 world, especially in the low-code world. A lot of I'm not going to say that the computer is assuming that you must meant. It's like Clippy on steroids, assuming that they're doing this low-code thing to this capacity over here. Maybe I should give them capacity over here and do this stuff and do it automatically. That's not exactly what I mean by that, but it means that a lot of the insights and that other information, the same things that go behind, say, Amazon's power of why they can do just in time, for example, inventory, that sort of stuff is happening behind the scenes with those tools. Really cool. Other things that we get to see is the app management services. In fact, we're going to see a lot more of that because there's always going to be that custom says, well, this system can do everything but, and then that big but is that one little piece that they have to do. App management services come to the rescue with this in particular. It's actually being used by the system for a lot of the apps themselves. At the same time, it's something that can be used to support anything that gets extended. So this is a very key component to those pieces. Azure DevOps. Sometimes used, sometimes not, because there's, of course, many ways to skin that cat for the DevOps and application lifecycle management story. But this one actually is a pretty important one. The optimal one to be using for this to happen. It's what is running a lot of the systems underneath. GitHub is let's just say, the side-by-side piece for that right now in the Microsoft world. But in the end of the day, even the solutions in the low-code area thrive using Azure DevOps. So this is another important technology on the Azure side that supports the revolution. And finally, application insights. At the end of the day, what's the point of getting stuff done when you can't measure it? One of the big things for me when I give my talks for clients that are getting things like centers of excellence, or they want to do adoption, they want to do measurements, they want to say, how can we see how we're doing? It's like, well, metrics are key. Without a metric, it's like I deployed an app into the forest, and what happens to the app in the forest when it doesn't get used again? Does it make a sound? Well, if you had metrics, perhaps you would know the answer to that. Like the same thing. I can't hear the tree falling in the forest if I have nothing listening to it, and I don't have something that says this is the sound decibels, and we agree that decibel means this, and this means loud, and all those pieces. The application insights over here, that's a long way to get around to that area. The application insights that comes with Azure works with all of these systems, not just the M365 side, but also the low-code side, to determine how you're doing, what's going on, capacity, you name it, all those pieces that you can get. Besides creating your own metrics or establishing your own metrics, it's one of the key pieces underneath the covers that's going to help in the revolution. All of these pieces together made low-code possible. A lot of the low-code, if you think about it, low-code, they've been doing low-code forever. What's the first one? Excel on the spreadsheets. We used to make macros. Remember macros? I mean, super calc and all this stuff. Oh, I'm aging myself, getting old. Those were the original low-code pieces. And I remember Steve Jobs with Next. I was with Reuters at the time, and he used to do demonstrations for the traders here in Chicago. He'd bring over the Next machine, and he would bring it over to the CEO, big hedge fund guy, and said, hey, watch this. I'm going to connect this box to that box, and it's going to take your speech and stick it into an email and send it to your employees, and here's you talking to the whole company. And then and big, loudspeakers, there's the CEO, getting his ego stroked from watching himself talk to his whole company because he just connected two boxes like a programmer. He made a program happen. Low-code stuff, it's been happening for the longest time. Why wasn't it possible? Because it required a massive amounts of infrastructure underneath to happen. You could have to make it work. Data centers like nobody's business to make it happen. The cloud is there now. All of these servers now, look at all these pieces. They all come together. Because these exist, and they're now quite mature, frankly, compared to where they were maybe even 5 years ago. Suddenly we've reached that critical mass. We've made it where low code is actually feasible, where we could we can create, and I like to call this the case of governance is one of the big topics we have. Well, this low code, isn't that like Microsoft Access? People can just use it. Anybody, the so-called citizen developers, get a hand of it, and all of a sudden, oh my God, they're going to create an MS Access database that's going to ruin this company. So, well, if they had the cloud back then, frankly, it wouldn't have happened. Think about it. The technology has improved, right? So, and it was the case of the Wild West. All right, well, here's the Wild West. They go over there. The townspeople move in. They have their shootouts. Things happen. The town goes up. The town goes down, and time moves on. Now, imagine, here's the town. Oh, all the cowboys and everyone else show up. Hey, can we have shootouts? Sure, go ahead. Shootouts. And then all of a sudden, midnight, reset. Next day, all the people that were shot, they're back. Everything's all ready. What does that sound like? It sounds like Westworld, right? Imagine that now with the cloud, the power of that Westworld, all the governance pieces and all these pieces. The concept is I can actually set up a town. They can do whatever they want in their little area, and then I can reset it and redo it. If you think about every architecture concept that goes with like from 12 factor to Fine 9 or whatever that goes into play over here, that is happening in the case of low code. Low code is possible now. And that revolution is possible because of all these services. You feel like I made the point that, yes, it's happening because of this? Very well, then I shall move on. By the way, because I'm filling up the screen on my end, if there are hands raised in the chat, hopefully the folks on the side will give me a quick message, and I'll see if I can hold off and answer a question.
Yeah, I'll let you know. I don't see anyone posting any comment or raising their hands.
Everyone's having dinner and enjoying their show, so very good. All right, let's keep you.
Ralph, I'll ask
yes.
a quick question. So
yes, go ahead.
Where does Logic Apps fit into that picture?
You want to go ahead of the story? Why don't you?
Well, okay.
Yeah, I heard it was going to be somebody with a black cloak that's going to say, "I am your father," and that's going to happen. Oh, yes, that's coming. I actually will explain exactly where that's coming. Hang on, we were almost there. I actually had to keep it out of there because I had to make it fun to surprise. Okay, let's talk about now Power Platform and Dynamics 365. Actually, so I mentioned Power Platform first, then Dynamics 365 because a lot of people, because of how popular it is right now, people think that's the order, but actually it's the other way around. It started with Dynamics 365. Essentially, it's the ultimate SaaS on SaaS system that was out there because Dynamics was actually something that came out that did not really care about M365 itself. All right. And so it's your premium business applications platform. It's, well, the folks that had the money essentially bankrolled what it is on the case of Microsoft, a system that is so powerful because it's doing your finances, doing sales, doing supply chains, doing all this great stuff. It's like, with all that power that came with it, next thing you know, you were able to do other things. All right, and this was powered up by what's called a common data service platform. And the idea was they said, in order to make something like Dynamics work in our SaaS world, we had to find a way to make data work in a more structured fashion that was easy to, let's just say, adapt in the case of a framework. And they called it a common data service at the time. It's got a new name now, but we'll get into that. But that's one of the key pieces, one of the key linchpins on how all of this ended up having to work. All right. Again, not coupled with M365, but it's tied with this common identity management services. So Active Directories. I mean, the most obvious one, Active Directory services. Dynamics user meet M365 user. Easy. All right. It didn't have to be that way. In fact, that was actually extensible where you could mess around a little bit. That's all fine and well. But again, why mess with it when the native works just fine? All right, and of course, Dynamics was for sales, marketing, service orgs, finance groups, general commerce, and supply chain management. Let's just say the stuff that runs the business, that makes the money in the business. So they were paying premium prices. So Microsoft did all they can. If they're going to charge premium, they better service at premium if they want to stay in this business and not be laughed out or kicked out. Well, Dynamics is pretty strong. We haven't heard of them going away anytime soon. They are actually up there toe-to-toe with the other organizations like SAP and everyone else. Like, well, if they can do that, they might know something, and maybe they have something that can be used. Essentially, it's the innovation here. Essentially, this is where the power for a Power Platform came from. The innovation that was done over here extended, all right, that was extended essentially into the Power Platform. They looked at it, it's like, this is how we do, for example, model-driven applications. Like, hey, you know what? We can do that not just for Dynamics C stuff. We can do that for any stuff. Okay, how about that? Well, we want this way to make, for example, the app so folks can do forms and everything else. I was like, well, they're doing that in Dynamics, but it's the hard way over there because a lot of that's built in and ready to go. But what if we took that same framework and applied it? Poof, next thing you know, it apps. The workflows that go back and forth. We're using essentially this common data service under the covers to handle the messaging and all those other pieces, all those aspects of it. Well, Power Automate comes from that. Just to say, and everything will start flowing as you start seeing it coming through. So, and with that, we can start looking at these features specifically. All right, starting with, we have the case of, for example, Power BI is the first one. And let me explain about, in the case of Power BI. Power BI is the first of the Power Platform apps. And this is a bit of history. This was not really dependent on Dynamics or CDS and everything else. This was essentially taking what was Excel or Excel services and of course SQL services and SQL Server, all those pieces, and they said, we got to make a reporting system that's going to blow away everybody, that's going to make it work. And Power BI was the answer to that. So if you might have seen Power Query or other of these pieces, the idea was, this is why, by the way, even though it's in the platform, it sort of has its own nuances for infrastructure in the back. Power BI was the first one that came out that said in a low-code fashion, and what they mean by low-code is you can open up something in like an Excel, the Excel paradigm, type in a few formulas and do powerful stuff, as opposed to having a programmer write all this business logic and make all this stuff happen to make it happen. So Power BI is the first one. The next one, of course, Power Apps, that's essentially your front end. The model-driven app says that means here's a model of data, makes an app for it for free. That's a no-codey way of doing it. And Power Apps are mostly what's called Canvas apps. The concept of a Canvas app, they call it a Canvas because you actually have a screen. You put in maybe a Dropbox, a button. You might put nice pictures. You might connect things to make it happen. That's essentially the front end, and that's would be Power Apps. Power Pages used to be like the baby version. Power Pages was the concept of you have a ready to go, sort of like not WordPressy. It's not quite WordPress. It's like WordPress with steroids. The concept of having pages that are built straight from the data. So like the model-driven apps would create maybe a front end. That same model-driven app can create pages that have data to put in. I'll give you an idea of where a lot of this stuff is used. If you might have had to fill out, for example, a census form, or maybe you wanted to get your free COVID tests sent to your house or something like that, and then you had a form to fill out that seemed quite simple. You know, it was bare bones, but it was pretty accurate. It asked for all the right information. It MFA'd you. It did all this stuff, and you were all fine and well. There was a lot of those that were done around the world that were done with Power Pages, or what it used to be called Power Portals. And it's essentially the low-code way of getting to essentially websites to do a lot of pieces. This is not SharePoint, not the same. If you might have heard about SharePoint, it's not the same as that. It's not like say what my list is, here's my columns, and then all these features are given to you. It's not that. What it is mostly is just to focus, for example, the data consumption for people going in and out. And here's the big thing about this one. This whole system that we're talking about, the M365 world, remember we said tied by identity management? That means that whoever is using it, and you might notice, M365, you can't just use it as an anonymous user. That's no way. That's one of the big trade-offs with, say, an Azure application plane versus M365 is if you're going to be here, we absolutely have to know who you are. All right. Power Pages says, you know what? You may be anonymous, and we can guarantee you're anonymous. And how do we know that we're guaranteeing? It's like, well, in Europe, when they say you're anonymous, you better check the boxes, and we're going to check you to see that you're anonymous. And it has passed that test. So it actually allows for external users to use the system. So its licensing is a bit different. So that's Power Pages. Power Automate. Power Automate, just workflow. It's just flow. That's it. Not much. It doesn't sound very interesting, other than from there also comes things like RPA, the robotic processing automation. It's like, well, essentially anything that can be automated is out there. You know what they say? If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? But I'll say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, automate it. Because if something is not broken, and if something works exactly the same every time, with Power Automate or Power Automate Desktop, or what's called the UI desktop flows, and the other systems, by the way, besides the Microsoft that does this, if I can just simply record the steps, or I could, use the system to create the framework for those steps so that I can put in my own scale of data to go into it. I can automate it. If something works very well and you can automate it, next thing you know, you've just you brought value in very short time, in very short order. And that comes under the Power Automate side. Power Virtual Agents essentially is the AI and the bots that were available in the bot framework and everything else. But what it does is it packages up for you where that's literally no code. You do not write code here. You do not even write HTML. You don't write CSS. It's like you come in here and you're basically instructing and teaching the bot what to say for what. In fact, you don't even have to do that in some cases. You can point this particular system to a FAQ page, and poof, it'll create an instant bot that does all that stuff for you. You can stick it into Teams, an instant hosting place. It's a URL, so you can use it in your own application outside of the system. You got to pay, but outside of the system as a bot service if you feel like having something that's completely outside of the system. The concept of Power Virtual Agents. All right, moving on to some of the support features that are in there. In this particular case, and for a low code, by the way, this is the concept for all low code, and this is actually the concept for things like Teams and Slack and everything else. The concept of the connectors, to be able to connect to other services, applications, or data. And Power Platform in the Microsoft world, even though it was nicely supported by Azure and had all that extensibility, it's like, yeah, that's great, it's extensible. Yeah, I know I can roll my own. But, that other service already has that built in. I just plug it in and I'm done. And then there'll always be people that say, it's like, well, look, I got this ready to go. I don't have to build it. Well, right now, when I like this because I'm still seeing slides from Microsoft showing only 200. There's actually 700. It's actually going to be close to 1,000 probably within a year of different connectors. And this is for everything from just Twitter to SAP to, and if you can imagine just the most arcane kind of connection, it's probably now going to start appearing over here. And they've created a framework, and this framework means that you could run stuff in Azure. In fact, there's a way you can do Azure hosting for these services and connect back to here. Well, that's another thing. If you want to make money with that, let us know. We'll talk about it. But for the meantime, the idea of this of the Power Platform is it thrives on these connectors. In order for it to be productive, it needs to connect to the thing that it needs to make changes for. All right. So of course it can connect to anything that's M365. Sure. It doesn't necessarily connect to everything that's Azure. All right. The Azure stuff is it's open. So yeah, I can connect to Azure at the top level, but you have a lot of configuration to do. So what would you do? It's like, well, I'm going to connect to maybe Kubernetes services. Like, okay, why do you want to do that? Maybe I want to do some automation of the Kubernetes services. Okay, that's all fine and well, but you probably have to build that. I'm expecting that you have built something on the Kubernetes side that's ready to go to be touched, because the Power Platform is not going to do that for you. Oh, well, what if I wanted it to build a container system for me on the fly? Oh, okay. So now you would actually have to build something, and that would be the connector in between. That would now be a new connector, and it could be called the AKS Maker, and market it to Microsoft or keep it for yourself. And now you'll have your low-code system able to talk to it, and maybe it's just a single button that says, make my boxes. Right there, connector. That's the concept. Important one for this. Moving on, we were talking about data over here. We talked about that CDS here. Now this is Dataverse, and over here you're seeing this is I brought an example of the Azure pieces supporting and bringing power to the Dataverse. As you're looking at in this particular area, we're trying to power in for visualizations for Power BI, and we're getting data that we're going to have data lakes and all these pieces and all these pieces happening with each other. And Dataverse is simply another store that's part of this whole process. So Dataverse can, for example, take in the common data service pieces from Dynamics, the data services that are coming from the low-code apps from all over the places, and feed into the Azure Data Factory and become part of an entire ecosystem, because it's friendly and they know each other very well. It's all fine and well. But what is Dataverse? Dataverse is a database system, pretty much. And some might say it sort of reminds us of SQL, but not quite. You don't have the power of the SMS tool when you can go and do your relationships and play around and do queries with pieces like that. A lot of that, because it's low code, has been mitigated and minimized so that it's under control. In fact, when you create a Dataverse table, a lot of like columns and a lot of like just say the model information and the framework is built into it. So you instantly get security, you instantly get identity management, you instantly get auditing. A whole bunch of stuff is all built in for you that, yeah, sure, you can do it in SQL and roll your own, but you'd have to do it from scratch each and every time over there. Think of Dataverse as like, well, if it's like SQL with a butler, but the butler is Alfred Pennyworth of Batman, and you are Bruce Wayne, and he's the Alfred Pennyworth. He's the SAS ex-SAS commando, barista extraordinaire, and and can take care of all your everything butlerish that's needed to be done. You could do it without the butler, and what happens when Bruce and Batman go out and they forget Alfred? He gets beat up, doesn't he? He's like, well, why not have Alfred if it's included? Especially some people complained, well, that's a premium price. Well, not quite, but when it is, it's a small premium to be able to get Alfred. All right, moving on. Another piece that's important to the low-code area on this side is PowerFX. They've always had this language for the low-code apps, and over here, it just comes from, and we've said, what is low-code? It comes from, there's Excel as an example. See that little formula? Some of you might be getting PTSD from looking at the Excel formula right over there, but nope, this one, you take that, you take it further, and wait, that looks familiar. It looks almost Excel-ish, and it's Excel-ish, and it's doing evilish input stuff over there at the bottom. That's the idea over here, though. They've actually put that together and created a framework out of that as well. A low-code system to be, let's just say, powerful, needs to have a language to be able to speak with. All right. This is again possible because of the strong and powerful compute underneath the covers coming from Azure. Without it, because Excel, for example, you ever try having like a 1,000-row Excel on your computer? Especially back in the old days, we could bring down whole PCs just from having big spreadsheets that were just gone. But because this is all happening behind the scenes, behind the services, all happening back there in the Azure side, this is possible. Very exciting. Hey, we're doing good on time over here. Yes, we're almost here.
Love the Batman reference. Wow, that was great.
Indeed. I'm gonna. If we're being recorded, I want my royalties here. Let's see. Okay, going back. Power Platform support features. The other one here. We have AI Builder. We talked about AI. Oh, this is powerful. It's a little bit of premium-y. But the idea of like you build it yourself. Remember what I said? Yeah, Batman can go in and go and fight, and he's got the martial arts chops to go and do stuff. But you come home, you got to have your coffee, and you got to get your bat suit cleaned up. Essentially, now we're going to take this now to the AI side of things. The AI builder is what this is, works with all the Power Platform elements, essentially to add the intelligence, essentially packages all that AI modeling, the machine learning, all those pieces are here, ready to go. And look at these examples over here. Here's the case where like it's doing things like extracting info from invoices, looking at information like what's a good one here? Business cards. So just those are simple ones. They're trite, perhaps. The invoice one is not trite. That's a big one, actually. There's whole industries based on auto feeding invoices of any kind, any type, no matter what, and instantly taking care of all this data input and everything. That's a big business, and here it is, essentially for the common person, they're able to do it. The actual AI models in the formula bar itself. They've actually brought it to that point where you can actually do sentiment analysis. Sentiment analysis, like I just typed in something like, gosh, you really suck. And then sentiment analysis says, I don't think he likes you. There we go. Sentiment analysis in a nutshell. Entity extraction. You're grabbing pieces from someone's sentence. Someone's typing in. Remember the bots we were talking about? A lot of this stuff, key phrase extraction. That can, in the apps themselves, in the automate flows that go in and suck out data from wherever, it can grab that information and push it back the same way the bots do and make decisions or classify or do whatever you want, the tech languages, and make all that stuff happen. With the Power Apps is so powerful now that they allow you to actually upload an image from like just an image that has a button and maybe some drop downs and everything else, and it instantly creates the app, I'll show that. I might get a chance to show that. It instantly creates the form for you, and maybe it's just a starting point to get going. So you have your POC. These are getting smarter and smarter every time. Again, a little bit of premium to go to some of these services, but the idea is it's bang for the buck. You get that little short cost and you're in there. And I guess for Microsoft, it's a bit of a gateway drug. You really like that? You probably want more, because when you try to do this stuff at scale, you come to the point where, remember I said pre-built capacity, you will hit that capacity limit. Whoa, we love this. We're going to use it. Oh, what did I just hit? I just hit my head on the top of the ice over here. I need to get out. Well, now you have to go to the real Azure and let's do your scale over there for flow and everything else. Well, actually, we'll look at that a little bit. All right. Now we're talking about extending the power, where Azure will never, the Azure work will never go away. So extensibility, of course, with all this stuff brings just simply more power, and that's what it's all about. The Azure work is still at hand. And I would say that when you were dealing with the Power Platform with a lot of the low code, I think Azure is probably one of the best places for that to start. Surely all the other systems can do the same thing. They have their services that will accomplish the same goals, which is all fine and well. But if you're in the Microsoft ecosystem, as they say, stay in. If you're in that area, it's much easier to support, much easier to follow through, and probably the documentation will apply in a much better way. You can go ahead if you're Iron Man chef and you want to get best of breed, whatever, fine and well. But frankly, for the Power Platform, Azure is the way. Speaking of the way, some of areas of opportunities will include custom connectors. So remember we talked about these connectors. Make your own API or service to do something. They have what's called a connector that's a generic HTTP connector. I'll connect to a REST service, and then you get like a big dump of JSON. You still have to mess with that JSON. That's not low code anymore. You got JSON files, and you got to figure out what the structure is, and you have to have some smarts to know how to do with it. Wouldn't it be cool if that was just a web service, an actual REST API that was done properly with the custom connector framework, so that when it connects to it, they don't have to ask about what's the authentication. I got to include a token. I need to drop this file or that. All that stuff is taken care of. A lot of opportunities for work right there. Data gateway sources, so on the data side. So we looked at those tables, like, well, we said Dataverse. Well, this stuff only seems to work with Dataverse or any of this stuff. Well, actually, Dataverse has a way of viewing things in the real world as a virtual table. Right now, SQL is the first one they have, and they're going to start growing them out as they go along. But the concept over here is you could do an ETL, which is essentially, I'm going to take data and via a flow, I'm going to move it over to over here. It's a copy of the data. So that means that it's not only not real time, it's not essentially the source of truth, frankly. You want something to be a source of truth, you think the concept of virtual tables. Again, ETL is ETL. I'm moving data from here to there. That's definitely something that would be done regardless. Standing up those data lakes and enhancing analytics, and that would happen in the Azure side. That would not happen in the front end side. You might enhance the visuals for Power BI, but that's not the same as enhancing how to deal with data in the giant scale behind the data lake areas in your using Synapse or some of those other systems. All right, the case of DevOps. All right, the CI/CD guy, either via ADO, GitHub, or any container-based solutions. Actually, there's a lot of CI/CD going on with the SharePoint framework solutions that use container-based solutions. This is, again, let's just say, in the power of Azure or in the power of the cloud to make a lot of that stuff happen. So there's a lot of opportunity that's going to happen here. There is DevOps, for example, in the Power Platform, but it uses ADO. So it's not for the faint of heart. They haven't been able to use it. They don't have like a drop it here and make it happen. Someone made an app, a Power app that did an accelerator for ALM, but it's a toy because everyone who does real CI/CD says, well, it's got to have this ability, this kind of approval, and this kind of smarts and this kind of testing and all that stuff. Well, try to build that in an app. You might as well just build an app. Well, we might have a Power app that might do that one day, but all we're going to do right now is give you a starter kit, and meanwhile, back to the Azure boys and girls to build for real. And then for automation, and this was the question that came in. This is where you would now be leveraging at some point. All right, the automation is only going to follow what has been predefined, what has been pre-selected, what has been prepaid for. Logic apps is the key over here. And sometimes I'm going to do, especially if I want to do something at massive scale, The Power Automate bits are remember, they're tenant specific. If I allow you to go crazy and on your Power Automate in a Microsoft tenant, M365 tenant, I'm not going to survive. I have to have a limit. I'm essentially hosting 300 million of you guys and gals over here on my system. If I don't have a limit, what's going to happen? However, there are needs, and sometimes those needs will exceed what's going on. The Logic Apps is literally the side-by-side piece that actually Power Automate, the way it works is the way you build it, is actually based on how Logic Apps was built. So very, very cool. Well, that's the key piece. If you want to take things further, you're going to need to know that. The concept of virtual machines for RPA operations. The idea, of course, I'm going to do a remote processing. Well, I have to do it upon something. A legacy application is going to be running somewhere. Could be on a desktop. Could be in a VM. All right, and this is what Microsoft has provided. They provided a way for you in Azure to set up these VMs for your RPA operations. They have actually made it better. They said, you know what? How about we make that a service? Wherein you give us your RPA, and then we will let you run it, and we will scale up and down on your demand, and you get to pay only for what you use. However, we're taking care of the management of the RPA, of the virtual machines. That's actually a new service. It's of course, Azure is powering it, and oh, it's cool. It's running on Microsoft side, so it's not running in your tenant to cost you or hit you up for anything. But there's an idea where somebody thought this one out and said, with Azure, this is what I can do. And they came up with a solution. And finally, on the AI and machine learning, naturally, all that we saw there with all those smarts and everything else, those are based on what folks have already been doing with the bot framework and with machine learning and machine languages. I use ML for both of those. All of that can be extended. Someone comes up with something completely different because things will be invented. Say, hey, I need something to run the Mars rovers because we're going to have a bunch of those, and nobody's going to go to Mars, but however, their faces are going to be walking around. Okay, fine. You got to build something to make that happen. Let's extend the framework. And then it becomes one of those little plugins or add-ins that go for the low-code side. So mom can now write, mom or grandma can now write their code in their low-code so they can go ahead and run their Mars rover in space. All right. Moving on. Next steps for learning more about this stuff, because this is fun stuff. Some learning resources. Learn.microsoft.com. There's actually a different address, but if you type that in, by the way, if you want to learn your Azure stuff, this is where you go, right? This is the starting point, and very much so for anything low-code Power Platform M365. And it all essentially exists here in docs.microsoft.com. It's the source of all goodness. If you're still using MSDN, can you show me that link? I'm surprised it's still alive. But yes, this is where you would end up going. And oh, by the way, did you know that docs.microsoft.com is on GitHub? So if you have an issue with something, you can actually open up an issue and do a pull request against it. And maybe help Microsoft. So if you want to, don't help Microsoft unless you're in the open source area. However, do contribute. That's always a good idea because that helps everybody. All right, or you can get your own development tenant. Does everyone know that's doing Azure that you can actually have your own? And this, hey, you want to test your Azure? Get yourself an M365 tenant because that thing hits Azure like no one's business. You can actually, and here's a link over here to get on the dev program, and you can get a free 25 user. By the way, it auto renews every 90 days. Full powered E5, and E5 means the power of Power BI Pro, the power of all the security pieces, essentially all the working pieces working with this particular area. Sign up with it, and you can have several of those. The catch is the AI. Yes, the AI is smart. We'll look at you and say, are you using this for business? They can actually tell if you're trying to use this nefariously. They will know. If you're not using it at all, they will absolutely know. If you use it sometimes, once in a while, maybe create a flow, maybe do something, it's in there. Oh, by the way, it comes with Azure. So underneath is one of the screens is admin. For the admin screens is for Azure administration. So it is essentially a subscription with all the Azure services. You can add your Azure services to it, or you can link your subscription to this and manage it from your subscription. What does that mean? That means that now, hey, I can do things like create an app in Azure, do a little app registration-y thing, and now that app, I can show it off in SharePoint, or I can show it off in my low-code solution. my gosh, you're an Azure person with more power that you can now play with. What happens? And while you're at it, might as well find a Power Platform community that fits your view for what you're doing. Maybe you want to find one that's more dev-centric, more cloud-centric, more, I just like the automation stuff. Oh, I like that bot stuff. Powerusers@microsoft.com. You'll find my user group over there under the Power Platform, folks, but there's more specific ones. It's a good idea to get into those and find other user groups that you're going to work with. Let's just say even being there and contributing there gets noticed by Microsoft. Okay, hey, we're not exactly over. We're around the time that I thought. I went a little, not slowly. I decided to go through it all so we could get the most discussion that we can get. But now is a good time for Q&A and a time to indulge your curiosity.
Perfect. Ralph, I don't see any comments on the chat, neither anyone's hand being raised. So if anyone in the audience would like to ask anything to Ralph, feel free to unmute yourself and you can ask Ralph directly.
By the way, I'm showing over here at M365 my little dev tenant that I got for free right over here, and there's all my apps. There's my Power Apps. I'm just going to give you an example when I go into admin over here. And again, because I have the power of the users, I can do whatever combination of whatever I feel like doing to make it happen. But most importantly,
can you maximize that? Can you maximize that window so that we can see?
I will. Check it out. And over here, look at this, Azure Active Directory. And so I have, for example, an MSDN subscription. And what I did was I associated this to this account. So I can actually do DevOps with this piece over here. But look, this is Azure. We'll recognize it. Okay, yes, it's been a while since I connected on this particular machine. For Azure. All right, my mini dashboard with my, so look at this, it's Azure AD Premium P2. That's what came with the dev tenant. Here's my sign-ins. Oh, so this is basic. Well, everyone will understand this one. I could do enterprise applications users. So I manage this like an Azure portal for the pieces that are needed to support my bits. All right, and from here, I can manage my users, of course, in M365, or I can go here, do it from here. All right, but this also means that any service I want, I can do. But this is, of course, we're just looking at the Azure portal. I can just go straight up to portal.azure.com. Just to show no smoke and mirrors. It's not only AAD that's in here. See, same guy.
That has been one of the confusion with most of the folks, that what is a tenant? Tenant actually refers to Azure Active Directory tenant, which can be tied up with your Azure subscriptions as well as your M365 subscriptions.
Correct. Exactly. So there it is. I'm at portal.azure.com, which means, hey, anything that I see over here, there's my student benefits and all this stuff. Anything that I see over here, I can actually do. It might say, well, you need money for this. Well, you know what? I have a subscription. Let me tie it in. Let me bring it in. Everyone should understand that Azure allows you to, like to say, bring in subscriptions together from multiple sources. There's ways to make all that stuff happen. This is not different. What's the M365 tenant is simply a bunch of resources sitting on, quote unquote, an Azure subscription. But that's Microsoft are running it behind the scenes. They're essentially managing all that for you, but they're giving you enough of the power to be able to add to it, to be able to do your own thing to it. Clearly, if you have to pay, at some point someone has to pay for it. They're not going to let you do it for free, but that's exactly the point, right? I want to use my MSDN so I can have DevOps credits to do builds and all that stuff. Attach it to this. Now I can do builds for SharePoint and my low code and work with this, and I'm paying over there already, or I have prepaid over there. I'm taking care of it. But yes, do not let the M365 thing turn you off from saying that I can't do anything with this tenant because it's all locked down. It's not locked down. It's open if you have a place for it to go. It's like, imagine, it's like a boat with doors. Well, if you open it, there's the ocean right outside there. Well, if you dock another boat to it that's got things to do in that boat and you connect them, well, think of it that way. And hopefully the seas are not rough. So I just wanted to show that one really quick. Oh, let me then show one more thing. In the case we were talking about the Power Apps piece over here. Let me show you how ridiculously simple this is. And people say, well, why would I do that? I can as a dev, I can do this stuff very, very quick. I'm going to show you how ridiculously simple this is. By the way, see that image system? Upload an image into an app and convert it into an app. Ugh. Okay, fine. Let's do something very simple. I'm going to create an app, a fast app, SharePoint. It's going to connect to a SharePoint piece. So just watch the steps. Someone set up a timer. All right. I want to make a connection. I want to connect to my SharePoint. Here we go. I want to connect to one of my sites. Okay, I have one over here, Project 9 from outer space. And I want to connect to one of the lists that are in there. It just happens to be one right now. There's a recruitment tracker. So it's a full list. It's got full powers. And oh, let me connect to it. It's way down there. I have the widescreen going. All right, it's connecting. Loading. Elevator music. What? It's done? Let me skip it. It's done. Actually, this is it. It's all ready to go. I'm going to hit play. I can look at details. I can edit a detail. And of course, this is mobile ready, immediately ready for my mobile. And hit the checkbox. This is out of the box, by the way. I didn't write any code, right? And so, okay, wait a minute, but I might need to write code. I might need to make that header extensible. So I might say, see that text, that might be a formula. See over there, little formulas. And by the way, all the parameters all ready to go. So I could say, hey, tooltip. Any of this stuff might be based on some parameter of something, or I'll just hard code it, whatever I feel like. I can make components out of this. I can break it out into all these pieces. I can quickly share it. All right, I can save it. I can save it as a zip file, and I can pass it on to you over here. I could go and share. Oh, I have to save it first. So let's go save it. I'm going to save as like RECME. Okay, now that it's saved, now I can quickly share it. Again, all the plumbing going on behind the scenes with the Azure infrastructure so abstracted away behind what's going on, but any of that could have been. So I wanted to say, Adele. Okay, hey, Adele, I want to give you access to I'm going to make you co-owner too. How about that? Share. Done. Boom! I just created an app. I just shared the app. It runs. It's got data. Maybe let's go find that SharePoint site over here. Where is that SharePoint site? That we said it was Project 9. Do I have it here ready to go? SharePoint. That's customer voice. Here we go. I knew I had it ready to go. All right. So, by the way, this was the list. I created a list and just made it as is. Oh, I got to sign in. All right. I mean, it actually looks nice right over here. It's got its own editing thing. I can edit in the grid view. It's got all these pieces. However, I just created the mobile app for it. That mobile app, now I'll hand it over to the recruiter, and they're going over here, and they're going to do the recruitment tracker, ready to go. All right, and it's coming and it's taken care of. This is just a SharePoint list, just to be trite, just using it. It could have been an Excel, it could have been the Dataverse, which is the best, or it could have been SQL, or it could have been CRM, it could have been, you name it. It could have been any of those. And you just saw that in a matter of lickety split seconds. Now, by the way, I'm doing this demo for this over here. This is a 24-hour system. So while I'm doing this, there's probably maybe 1,000 other demos going on right now all over the world. Somebody like me showing exactly the same thing. Someone like me doing exactly the same thing, actually building apps somewhere in the world. And this is all happening on good old Azure. And the world is still ticking, and we haven't yet been disconnected. So somebody must know something. for capacity and running. Things to learn, by the way. If you need to learn how this stuff works, there's a lot of like the samples that they have for these things to that show the best practices. For that matter, if there's a best practice for creating an Azure enterprise application, look no further than how the heck they made this work. So that's a little bit of extra.
Yeah, that's really cool how easy it is to get started with these applications. You can create apps within minutes, and it's amazing how this is all powered by Azure.
Yes.
If anyone has any question, this is probably a last opportunity before we will close the meeting and let Ralph go. So if you have any questions or if you would like to discuss anything with Ralph, feel free to unmute yourself and you can ask any questions you might have.
Feel free to follow up with me after. Yes, go ahead.
So if I were to sign up for this with my work account,
yep,
I should let my Office 365 admin know, or will it even impact them?
So if you're getting a dev tenant, it's literally they have no idea that you're doing it because you're making a tenant that's completely yours. All it is, it's simply associated with your Office email. You could have done a Yahoo.com email. You could have done a any other kind of email for this, as long as it's a valid email. The Office, your own user accounts for your Office that you use, typically if you're doing MSDN, especially if you have MSDN through your company, that's the one you want to use. It's easier for the subscription to tie in with that. And by the way, sometimes MSDN benefits will include that link that says, hey, get your own dev tenant with this. It doesn't belong to your Office. However, if you leave your company, your email is probably left behind as well, which means you're going to leave behind your dev tenant.
But if
I was about to add that. Go ahead,
yes,
Chris, sorry.
But if I use my Hotmail, does it give me different features or is it the same?
Same.
Okay.
Same features.
You're just using an email. It just needs an email to register. That's what you're going to use.
It needs a valid email. I'm not sure if Hotmail will work, but it might. They might have. Has Hotmail been redeemed from like AOL.com? I don't know. I don't think that's ever been redeemed ever since. But there are certain emails that they know from, of course, because it's Azure, right? They know certain people trying to do this in, say, certain kind of countries, or people that are trying to do this in certain kind of places that are just say being watched are likely going to be denied, right? But if you're in
the Hotmail,
it got met Hotmail
accounts. The Hotmail accounts are still valid. I have a Hotmail account that I use for all my personal Azure stuff.
Excellent. So give that one a shot. If it gets mad at you, then Hotmail is not totally redeemed in Microsoft's M365 eyes. However, if it works, let it go.
And also, I recommend make sure you don't put any corporate data on your dev tenant. Don't want to get in trouble with that.
So this is a very interesting concept. One of the things with M365, all the power in the world of DLP or data loss protection can come in here. You can actually turn on the policies that actually watch out for PII and other kind of information. If you want to keep yourself from making that mistake, you can actually program it, or rather configure it to prevent that, right? You remember, if you're going to open this up in your company, right? That's why actually some companies block it. They're like, hey, you're opening up a tenant that's not in our, you need to get approval before you can even view it inside of our VPN or whatever. It could be blocked. But for the most part, they're not, because it's just another service, just another website like anything else. But if you're not, you're okay. And you're right. You want to be very, very careful. If you're going to play in the play area and you bring toys over there, just make sure that you're keeping it secure. It's actually a good thing about this is you can actually learn how to do that yourself. And not that you're going to do that as a job, but at least you know how to explain maybe later on to your administrator that you're trying to get something done. Let me explain to you how to make this work, because you can actually have your own full power system to prove it. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. My admin left for vacation, so now's the time to do it.
Yes, there you go. While the cat's away.
Yeah, Chris, do note that, if you use your Office email and later you leave that organization,
yes,
then you will not have access to that email account. And if something happens to your dev tenant, you might not be able to.
That happened to my last company. I did that exactly. And what happens now is I can't get into it to do any updates. I couldn't. I'm not actually. There was a point where I couldn't do updates at all. Then there was a point where it said you need to confirm your participation, blah blah blah, to keep this alive. And of course, I could not do the MFA because it would not log in and sign in. The key is though, MFA is what they use. You cannot turn that off completely, absolutely. You can set it up where your users in here are not using it. That's all fine and well. But you as an administrator coming in from the dev level for this account will require it'll want it. It's going to challenge you, either authenticator or something. And the challenge usually means it has to try to talk to wherever that account is connected to. When you say work or office account, it's going to connect via AD to it. Microsoft's going to know about it. You can't hide it, right? So that's why we underscored it. If you leave your company, you're going to leave behind your dev tenant, and then get your new company, make a new dev tenant. Number two is whatever work you did over here, just remember that you can always export it out, right? And low code stuff especially, it's easy to export out. There's ways to export SharePoint solutions. And you know what? Best practice. If you're doing CI/CD, you're building stuff. If you're doing CI/CD, then of course you have the option to create your packages, take your packages, do some infrastructure as code, go to your new tenant, run your infrastructure as code, set yourself up again. They have this concept, by the way, for Power Platform called landing zones, which is exactly that, using ARM from Azure to set up environments and everything else, and it all happens in Azure.
Yeah, sounds good. I'm comfortable with that. I won't lose anything.
All right.
I'm feeling good.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, I think we are on time. Thank you so much, Rel, for taking time tonight for talking on Power Platform and how Azure ties into the low-code revolution. And it was very informative. Thank you so much for taking our time tonight.
Well, it was a pleasure, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and yeah, available on the other ones. Give us. Feel free to contact us. My LinkedIn does work for answering stuff as well.